My mom said my brother's baseball final was more important than my wedding, so she made my entire family skip my big day. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far it has reached. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 31, and for most of my life, I was the easy child. The one people praised for being mature, understanding, and never causing trouble. It sounded like a compliment. It usually meant I was the one expected to give things up. My younger brother, Ryan, always came first. He had practice, he had tournaments, he was stressed, he had potential. So every family plan bent around him. And because I rarely argued, everyone assumed I didn't mind. Ryan wasn't cruel. He just grew up in a family that treated his dreams like the center of everything. One of my earliest memories is my 8th birthday. My mom promised we'd go to a small amusement park, but that morning, Ryan got invited to an extra baseball practice. Mom smiled at me and said, "We'll celebrate another day, okay?" That day never came. After that, I stopped crying and started saying, "It's okay." That became my role. If Ryan forgot something, I fixed it. If my parents needed help, I covered it. If relatives praised me for being so understanding, I smiled through the sting. I thought that was just what older sisters did. Things got easier when I moved out, not because my family changed, but because I finally had space. Then I met Daniel Brooks. We met at a charity event, and he made me laugh 10 minutes in by spilling coffee on himself. "I'm usually more coordinated than this," he said. "I hope so," I told him. This would be a long conversation otherwise. It was a long conversation anyway. Daniel listened. He remembered things I said. He noticed when I was tired before I admitted it. The first time he invited me to dinner with his parents, I expected polite small talk. Instead, his mom hugged me at the door. His dad asked about my work and actually waited for the answer. His sister kept sending me home with leftovers. On the drive back, I finally said, "How does your family do that?" "Do what?" "Actually pay attention to each other." He looked at me for a second. I thought every family did. I didn't answer because mine didn't. When Daniel proposed almost 2 years later, I didn't want a huge wedding. I just wanted one thing: both of my parents in the front row. As the wedding got closer, everything felt good for once. Dress fittings, cake tastings, music choices, even arguing with Daniel about a photo booth. For the first time, my life felt like it was happening to me. My parents even sounded supportive. Mom asked about flowers. Dad joked about practicing his dance moves. A week before the wedding, Mom invited everyone over for Sunday dinner. Ryan would be there too, and I thought we were finally going to talk wedding details. Daniel squeezed my hand before we went inside. "You look nervous." "I always get nervous here. You don't have to handle everything alone anymore." Dinner started like always. Ryan talked about baseball. Dad asked about his batting average. Mom brought up the championship coming up. I waited for the conversation to turn to the wedding. Eventually, the plates were nearly empty when Mom folded her napkin and looked at me. "Emma," she said carefully, "there's something about the schedule we still need to talk about." The room went quiet. Even Ryan looked up from his plate. I'll continue directly from the previous part. Nobody spoke for a couple of seconds. Mom looked at Dad, then back at me. "The state championship game was moved," she said. "Ryan's final is now on Saturday." I smiled, waiting for the rest. "Oh, okay?" She nodded. "The same Saturday." I blinked. "My wedding? Saturday?" "Yes." I looked at Ryan first. He seemed just as surprised as I was. "I didn't know they changed it," he said quietly. "Coach only told us yesterday." I turned to Mom again. "Well," I said, forcing a small laugh. "That's not ideal, but maybe the game starts later, or maybe the ceremony finishes before first pitch." I reached for my phone and opened the schedule our wedding planner had sent me. The ceremony is only 30 minutes. Even with photos, maybe you could leave afterward. Mom didn't even look at my screen. "The stadium is almost 2 hours away." Daniel leaned forward. "What time is the game?" 1 in the afternoon, Mom answered. "Our ceremony starts at 11, Daniel said calmly. If everything stays on schedule, they'd still have plenty of time. For a second, I thought we'd solved it. Dad even nodded a little. "That could actually," Mom interrupted him. "No." The word landed harder than I expected. It would be too stressful, she continued. Traffic could be bad. Ryan needs everyone there before the game. He shouldn't have to worry about whether his family is going to make it. I stared at her. I'm your family too. You know that's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? She sighed like I was making the conversation difficult. This is the biggest game of Ryan's life. Daniel spoke before I could. And this is Emma's wedding. Mom gave him a polite smile, the kind people use when they're trying not to sound annoyed. I understand that, Daniel, but weddings are different. Different how? He asked. There will be pictures, a reception. We can celebrate afterward. I frowned. You can't redo the ceremony. She waved her hand. We'll see the pictures. It's practically the same. Nobody laughed. Dad cleared his throat. Maybe, he started, maybe your mother and I could leave right after the ceremony. Mom turned toward him. And Miss Ryan, warming up? Dad's mouth closed again. That tiny moment stayed with me. He wasn't agreeing with her. He was giving up. Ryan shifted in his chair. I mean, he said carefully, you guys don't all have to come because of me. Mom immediately answered for him. Of course we do. Ryan looked down at his plate. I couldn't tell whether he felt guilty or simply uncomfortable. Maybe both. Trying to keep the conversation moving, I said, what if we stream the game at the reception? Daniel already mentioned putting TVs near the bar for guests who wanted to follow sports. Daniel nodded. We can absolutely do that. Mom shook her head before either of us finished. No, Ryan deserves to look into the stands and see his family. The sentence hung there. I waited for the second half. The part where she'd say, I deserve the same thing, it never came. Daniel reached under the table and gently squeezed my hand. I hadn't even realized my fingers were shaking. The rest of dinner drifted into awkward small talk. Dad asked Daniel about work. Ryan talked about one of his teammates getting injured. Mom discussed hotel prices near the stadium as if we'd already settled everything. I barely touched my dessert. When dinner finally ended, Daniel helped carry dishes into the kitchen. I stepped onto the back porch for some air. A minute later, Dad came outside. He stood beside me without saying anything. It's getting cold, he said. Yeah. Another silence. He rubbed the back of his neck. I know this isn't easy. I looked at him. So, what do you think? His lips parted. For a moment, I honestly thought he was finally going to stand up for me. Instead, he glanced toward the kitchen window where Mom was talking to Ryan. Then he lowered his voice. Your mother's trying to do what's best. I let out a quiet breath. Is she? He didn't answer. Daniel opened the back door. They're asking us to come back inside. I nodded and followed him. Mom was already sitting at the table again. She folded her hands together, looked directly at me, and said in a calm voice, Emma, there's something you need to prepare yourself for. She paused. We might not be able to come to your wedding. Emma, are you okay? You sound tired. My aunt's voice was gentle enough to make my chest tighten. I just wanted to check something, I said. Mom told me everyone couldn't make it to the wedding. Is that really what happened? There was a pause, not a long one, just long enough. I thought you already knew, she finally said. Knew what? Your mom called us weeks ago. I stopped walking. Weeks ago? She said Ryan's championship game had been scheduled for the same day. She told us the whole family would be there to support him and that you understood. I understood? That's what she told us. For a second, I couldn't even answer. I stared across the parking lot outside my office, watching people carry coffee cups and laugh about something completely unrelated to my life. So nobody ever asked me? No, sweetheart. Her voice became quieter. I honestly thought the two of you had already talked about it. I thanked her before hanging up because I didn't trust myself to say anything else. Maybe it was just one misunderstanding. That's what I kept telling myself. So I called my uncle. He answered on the second ring. Emma, everything ready for the wedding? I almost laughed. You mean you're still planning to come? Silence. Then he sighed. Oh, that single word told me everything. He admitted Mom had organized a family group call almost a month earlier. She explained how important Ryan's final game would be. She said colleges would be watching. She said the family needed to show unity. According to him, she also mentioned that I was being incredibly supportive, and had no problem celebrating my marriage another time with everyone. I figured you and Daniel had agreed to it, he said carefully. We never had that conversation. I didn't know. I know. And I believed him. That somehow made it worse. Over the next 2 days, I called cousin after cousin. Every conversation followed the same pattern. Confusion, an awkward pause, then the truth. Mom had already built the story for them. Some sounded embarrassed. Others tried to defend themselves. We didn't want to upset your mother. She seemed so certain. Ryan only gets 1 championship. So do I answered before I could stop myself. Nobody had a response to that. One of my older cousins admitted she'd questioned the decision. She asked Mom if someone should at least split up so both events had family there. Mom apparently laughed. Emma never makes a fuss, she'd told everyone. She'll understand. She always does. That sentence stayed with me all night. Not because it was new, because it was true. I always understood. I understood when Ryan got the bigger birthday parties. I understood when my college graduation dinner became a celebration for Ryan making varsity. I understood when holidays revolved around his tournaments. Every single time, I adjusted. Without realizing it, I'd taught everyone that I would. Daniel noticed the change before I said anything. You've been making calls all day? I know. What did you find out? I sat beside him on the couch and finally told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he rubbed his hands together and looked toward the window. They didn't choose the game, he said quietly. They chose the version of the story your mom gave them. I don't even know if that makes me feel better. It probably shouldn't. He reached for my hand. But at least now you know where this started. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Another cousin. She apologized for believing the story. Then she lowered her voice. Emma, your mom made everyone feel like disagreeing would ruin Ryan's big moment. So nobody pushed back? I wanted to. She hesitated. But you know how your mom is. Yeah, I did. If you've ever been the person who's expected to keep the peace no matter what, I'd really like to hear your story in the comments. Sometimes, hearing someone else's experience reminds us we're not imagining things. I set my phone down and stared at the wedding invitations spread across the dining table. They suddenly looked like invitations to a celebration only a handful of people planned to attend. Before I could gather my thoughts, another notification appeared. It wasn't from a cousin, it wasn't from an aunt, it was from Mom. Just one sentence. I hope you can understand. Daniel watched me push my dinner around the plate without taking more than a few bites. You've been staring at that pasta for 10 minutes, he said with a small smile. I know. You want to tell me what's going on in your head? I keep looking at the seating chart. I let out a tired laugh. Every time another relative cancels, I have to move people around again. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then stop looking at it tonight. I can't. You can. You're just convincing yourself you can't? I looked up at him. So, come have dinner with my family instead. I hesitated. Daniel, I'm serious. No wedding planning. No guest lists. No phone calls. Just dinner. I almost said no out of habit. Then I realized I'd spent my entire week chasing people who had already chosen somewhere else to be. Maybe one evening away wouldn't hurt. Daniel's parents welcomed us before we even reached the front door. His mom pulled me into a hug without making a big show of it. I'm so glad you're here, she said. His dad was already outside tending the grill, while his younger sister argued with him about whether he'd burn the corn. It's not burned, he insisted. It has personality, she teased. Everyone laughed. The conversation wasn't perfect. People interrupted each other. Someone dropped a serving spoon. Daniel's nephew spilled lemonade all over the table and looked completely horrified until everyone burst into laughter instead of getting angry. For a while, I forgot about my phone. Nobody asked why my family wasn't coming. Nobody treated me like I was fragile. They asked about my work. They asked how the wedding planning was going. When I mentioned we were still choosing music, everyone immediately started debating songs. His dad voted for old rock. His sister wanted something modern. His mom rolled her eyes. Please don't let him anywhere near the playlist. Daniel looked at me. You get the final vote. Such a simple sentence. You get the final vote. It shouldn't have felt unusual. But somehow it did. People actually waited for my opinion. They didn't talk over me. They didn't redirect the conversation back to someone else. I caught myself smiling without forcing it. Daniel noticed. "There you are," he whispered. "What?" "I've been waiting for that smile all week." Later, while everyone cleaned up together, I carried a stack of plates into the kitchen. Daniel's mom joined me. She dried her hands on a towel before speaking. "You've had a rough few days?" I nodded. I didn't realize it was so obvious. It is to people who care. That nearly made me cry. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "I don't know what happens with your side of the family." I looked at the floor. "But I want you to know something." She waited until I met her eyes again. "You became part of this family the moment Daniel knew he wanted to spend his life with you." I blinked. "So whatever happens over the next few weeks?" She smiled gently. "You're already one of ours." I couldn't answer. She wrapped me in another hug, and this time I didn't fight the tears. Nobody rushed me. Nobody told me I was overreacting. She simply stood there until I was ready to let go. The drive home felt quieter than usual. Not uncomfortable, peaceful. Daniel rested one hand on the steering wheel. "You okay?" I think. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights. I finally understand what people mean when they say a family can feel safe. He smiled without taking his eyes off the road. "I'm glad you got to see that." "So am I." For the first time since all of this started, I caught myself thinking about the wedding instead of everyone who wouldn't be there. I thought about marrying Daniel, about building something different, something healthier, something that didn't revolve around keeping one person happy at everyone else's expense. As soon as we got home, my phone vibrated. An email. The final batch of RSVP responses had come in. I opened the list slowly. One name after another. Regretfully, declines. Unable to attend. Will be supporting Ryan at the championship. By the time I reached the bottom, my hands had gone completely still. Almost everyone from my side of the family had officially said no. The final guest count sat open on my laptop for nearly an hour before I could bring myself to send it. The venue coordinator had been patient. "Just let us know the final number whenever you're ready." I wasn't ready, but deadlines don't really care how you're feeling. I deleted another table, moved a few names, combined two sections. When I finally hit send, the room suddenly felt much quieter. It wasn't just a number anymore, it was proof. The following days were filled with little moments that shouldn't have been difficult. At work, one of my coworkers smiled as we waited for the coffee machine. "So," she asked, "are your parents excited? I bet your mom can't stop talking about the wedding." I smiled automatically. "Oh, she's been pretty busy." "Well, tell her congratulations from all of us." "I will." The lie came out so naturally that it scared me. I hated how easy pretending had become. Another coworker asked if my brother would be giving a speech. Someone else joked that family weddings were always chaotic in the best way. I laughed when everyone else laughed. Then I walked back to my desk and stared at my computer screen without reading a single email. Even the vendors assumed everything was normal. The florist called to confirm family corsages. The photographer asked if there were any special family group photos I wanted to prioritize. I paused for just a second too long. "Let's focus on Daniel's family first," I finally said. The photographer didn't question it. "I'm sure we'll have plenty of time for the rest." I quietly said, "Maybe." That evening, I found myself sitting on the living room floor surrounded by wedding decorations, place cards, ribbon, small boxes for favors. Daniel sat beside me, folding programs. Neither of us talked much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was simply honest. He handed me another stack. "You don't have to keep pretending with me. I know. You can be angry." "I think I'm too tired to be angry." He nodded. "I understand." And somehow, I believed he actually did. My phone rang just as we finished packing the last box. Ryan. For a split second, hope rushed in before I could stop it. Maybe he'd finally realized what this had done. Maybe he'd talked to Mom. Maybe he was calling to tell me he'd convinced everyone to come. I answered immediately. Hey, Em." His voice sounded exhausted. "You okay?" I almost laughed. "Are you asking because you want to know or because you feel like you should?" He sighed. "It's been crazy here." "I'm sure." The team's practicing nonstop. Reporters keep showing up. Coach has everyone stressed out. I waited. So what? I thought maybe you were calling about the wedding. I am. Another pause. I just wanted you to know I'm under a lot of pressure too. I closed my eyes. I know the timing isn't great. It isn't. I wish things were different. So do I. I hope you're not mad at me. I searched for something to say. Something honest. I'm not asking you to choose between football and your future, Ryan. I know. I'm asking why nobody thought my wedding deserved the same support. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. I don't know what you want me to do. Neither did I. Because the answer I wanted wasn't something he could fix with one phone call. We said goodbye politely, like strangers trying not to argue. I set my phone down and looked at Daniel. That was it? Yeah. I'm sorry. So am I. If this story reminds you of someone who's always expected to be the understanding one, let me know in the comments. Sometimes the people who seem the strongest are the ones carrying the most. The night before the wedding, I charged my phone beside the bed. Part of me still believed I'd wake up to a message from Mom or Dad, even something simple. We'll see you tomorrow. I love you. We're proud of you. Morning sunlight slipped through the curtains. I reached for my phone before my feet even touched the floor. No missed calls, no texts from my mother, no texts from my father. Nothing at all. My phone was still the first thing I looked at. Nothing. No missed calls, no good morning, no we're on our way. I set it back down and told myself there was still plenty of time. People ran late all the time. Maybe they were already driving. Maybe Mom wanted to surprise me. Maybe Dad had finally convinced everyone to come. Hope has a funny way of hanging around, even after it's been proven wrong over and over again. A soft knock came at the door. You decent? Daniel's sister called. Yeah. She stepped inside, carrying a garment bag and 2 cups of coffee. I brought the important things. I laughed for the first time that morning. The dress and caffeine? Exactly. She handed me a cup. No wedding should begin without coffee. As we got ready, more people from Daniel's family drifted in and out of the room. His mom checked on me every so often without hovering. His niece proudly announced that she had practiced scattering flower petals all week. His dad somehow managed to make everyone laugh while trying and failing to tie his own tie. The room felt alive, warm, busy. For a few moments, I almost forgot what was missing. Then my phone lit up. My heart jumped. A notification from my bank. I let out a slow breath and locked the screen again. Daniel's sister noticed. You okay? I keep thinking it'll be them. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. I know. She squeezed my shoulder before quietly leaving me alone for a minute. While the hairstylist worked on the final touches, I checked the parking lot through the window every few minutes. Every car that slowed down caught my attention. Every familiar-looking SUV made my pulse race. None of them stopped. One of my closest friends, Mia, noticed where I kept looking. You expecting someone? My parents. She followed my eyes toward the entrance. They still have time. They do. But even as I said it, the words felt thinner than before. I wasn't convincing myself anymore. I was just repeating a possibility. Down the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Daniel talking with his parents. They didn't know I could hear pieces of the conversation. If her family doesn't show, Daniel began. His father nodded before he even finished. We know. I don't want her walking into half the room looking empty. His mother answered gently. We've already talked about it. His sister stepped closer. We'll spread out if we need to. His dad smiled. No empty side. Nobody sits alone today. Daniel looked relieved, though only a little. Thank you. I quietly stepped back before they noticed me listening. They had planned for my heartbreak without making me feel embarrassed about it. That simple act of kindness almost brought me to tears. A little while later, Daniel wasn't supposed to see me before the ceremony. He stood around the corner and called out instead. You hanging in there? Barely. You don't have to be brave today. I know. I'll be waiting. Those 4 words settled something inside me. Not everything, just enough. The wedding coordinator appeared a few minutes later. We're almost ready. She smiled professionally. Guests are taking their seats. I instinctively checked my phone one last time. Still nothing. No calls, no apologies, no explanation. The coordinator offered me her arm. You ready? I looked toward the entrance one final time. Every part of me expected to hear tires pulling into the parking lot. A car door. My father's voice. My mother's hurried footsteps. Anything. The silence answered instead. The music began. The large doors slowly opened. I lifted my eyes toward the ceremony space. Daniel's side was filled with smiling faces. His parents, his grandparents, his cousins, friends waving through happy tears. Then my gaze shifted to the rows reserved for my family. Seat after seat, row after row, almost completely empty. For 1 second, I couldn't move. The empty chairs pulled at my attention harder than the music, harder than the guests, harder than anything else in the room. Those seats had names attached to them. My parents, my brother, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles. People I had imagined watching me walk down the aisle since I was a little girl. Instead, there was silence. The wedding coordinator gave me a small nod. I took a breath, then another, and I started walking. Every step felt heavier than the last. I kept my eyes forward because I knew if I looked back at those empty rows again, I might stop altogether. Then I saw Daniel. He wasn't smiling the way people usually smile at weddings. His eyes were already wet. He looked at me like he understood exactly what this walk had cost. That was enough to keep me moving. By the time I reached him, he quietly took both of my hands. You made it. I almost didn't. I'm really glad you did. The ceremony began. The officiant welcomed everyone. Friends smiled. A few people wiped away tears. I answered the questions. I repeated my vows. My voice shook once, but I didn't stop. As the ceremony continued, I noticed something from the corner of my eye. Daniel's aunt quietly stood up. She picked up her program and moved to one of the empty seats on my family's side. A minute later, one of his cousins did the same. Then his grandparents. Nobody made a speech. Nobody pointed it out. Nobody treated it like charity. They simply filled the empty spaces one by one, slowly, naturally, as though they'd always planned to sit there. I glanced across the room again. The rows that had looked painfully abandoned only moments before were no longer empty. Daniel's family had crossed the aisle without making a scene. They weren't replacing my family. They were refusing to let me face those empty chairs alone. I felt tears gathering again. Daniel gently squeezed my hand. You okay? I nodded. This time, yes. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause echoed through the room. It sounded full, warm, loud enough that for a few minutes I forgot who wasn't there. The reception turned out nothing like I'd imagined months earlier. It was better in ways I hadn't expected. Daniel's dad insisted on giving a toast, even though he claimed he hated public speaking. His voice cracked halfway through. I'm not losing a son today, he said. I'm gaining a daughter. The room erupted into cheers. Daniel's mom hugged me before I could even wipe away my tears. His nieces dragged me onto the dance floor. His cousins filled the photo booth with ridiculous poses. Friends surrounded us with laughter that felt genuine instead of forced. At one point, I looked around the reception hall. There weren't as many guests as we'd originally planned. But every person who had chosen to be there actually wanted to be there. That mattered more than I ever realized. If you've ever discovered that family isn't only about blood, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Sometimes, the people who choose us become the ones who change our lives. By the time we returned to our hotel room that evening, I had finally taken off my shoes. My feet hurt. My makeup was slightly smudged. My cheeks ached from smiling. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Then my phone vibrated. One new message. Mom. I opened it without thinking. There wasn't a single question about the wedding. No congratulations, no apology, just a photo. Ryan stood in the middle of a football field, holding a championship trophy over his head while my parents smiled beside him. Under the picture was one sentence. We're so proud today. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I locked my phone, set it face down on the nightstand, and for the first time in my life, I chose not to answer. The silence after the wedding lasted longer than I expected. Not awkward silence, peaceful silence. Daniel and I took a short honeymoon a few hours away from home. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet cabin, long walks, too much coffee, and the chance to exist without checking my phone every 5 minutes. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't replaying conversations in my head. I was simply living. When we got back, life slowly returned to normal. Laundry replaced suitcases. Work emails replaced wedding schedules. The thank you cards sat on our dining table, and every evening, we'd write a few more together. I still can't believe your aunt gave us that giant air fryer, Daniel joked. I think she wants to make sure we never order takeout again. We laughed. It felt good to laugh without forcing it. I still hadn't answered my parents' message. They hadn't sent another one either. A part of me noticed that. Another part had stopped expecting anything different. 3 days after we came home, my phone rang while I was leaving work. The caller ID showed Melissa, one of our wedding guests. Hey, I answered. Emma, have you been on social media today? No. Why? You should probably take a look. My stomach tightened. What happened? It's not bad. She answered so quickly that I actually believed her. It's just unexpected. Melissa. I don't really know how to explain it. She paused before continuing. Someone posted a video from your ceremony. I immediately imagined the empty chairs. Someone must have recorded the moment I walked into the room. The thought made my face burn. I don't want people feeling sorry for me. I don't think that's what's happening. Then what is? You need to watch it. She sent me the link before hanging up. I sat in my car for a full minute, staring at my phone. Daniel climbed into the passenger seat a moment later. You look like you've seen a ghost. I handed him the screen. I think someone posted our wedding. He frowned. Do you want me to watch it first? I nodded. He pressed play. The video began with the ceremony entrance. The person filming had been sitting near the back of the room. At first, all you could see was me walking toward the altar. Then the camera slowly captured the nearly empty rows reserved for my family. I felt my chest tighten all over again. But the video didn't stop there. A few moments later, Daniel's aunt quietly stood and crossed the aisle. Then his grandparents, his cousins, his parents, one by one. No music had been added. No dramatic captions. No mocking comments. The person recording hadn't zoomed in on my face. They hadn't focused on the empty seats. Instead, the camera stayed wide enough to show something else. An entire family silently making room for someone who had been left standing alone. Near the end of the clip, you could even hear someone whisper behind the camera. That is one of the kindest things I've ever seen. I hadn't heard that on the wedding day. Watching it now hit differently. Daniel looked over at me. They captured the part that mattered. I nodded without trusting my voice. When I opened the comments, they weren't what I expected. People weren't making fun of me. They weren't arguing about football. They were talking about compassion, about chosen family, about quiet acts of love that didn't need attention to mean something. One comment simply read, "The people who moved those chairs understood what kindness looks like." Another said, "Every bride deserves to feel surrounded by love." And this family made sure she did. I wiped away a tear before I even realized I was crying. If you've ever experienced kindness from someone who wasn't obligated to give it, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Those moments deserve to be remembered. Before we left the parking lot, Melissa texted me again. Check the views. I refreshed the page. A few thousand. That seems surprising enough. An hour later, it had doubled. Before I went to bed, it had climbed again. When I woke up the following morning, I opened the video out of curiosity. I froze. Overnight, it had exploded, with the view count rising faster than I could refresh the screen. The number kept climbing every time I refreshed the page. Hundreds of thousands, then more. News pages started sharing it. Wedding accounts reposted it. People weren't talking about dramatic vows or expensive decorations. They were talking about kindness, about the family who quietly crossed the aisle so a bride wouldn't have to face empty rows alone. I still didn't say anything publicly. No explanation, no interview, no comment. It didn't feel like my story belonged in a debate. I wanted to leave it there. But the internet had other plans. The comments became longer, more personal. One afternoon, during my lunch break, I noticed a familiar last name, Carter. For a second, I assumed it had to be a distant relative. Instead, it was someone who had grown up in the same neighborhood. I'm not surprised. We all knew Ryan was treated differently. Emma was always the quiet one who never complained. Another comment appeared underneath. I remember her giving up things so her brother could have them. I thought that was just how their family worked. I kept scrolling. Each comment by itself wasn't shocking. Together, they painted a picture I had spent years trying not to see. That evening, I showed Daniel. I don't even know these people very well. They remember you. I barely remember them. He nodded. Sometimes other people notice patterns while we're still living inside them. That sentence stayed with me. The next day, an old high school classmate left a comment. Emma once skipped our senior trip because her parents said the money had to go toward Ryan's travel team. I had forgotten she'd known about that. I told everyone I simply didn't want to go. It had been easier than admitting the truth. More memories came back. Ryan's tournaments, my birthdays being rescheduled, school awards that somehow became family celebrations for whatever Ryan had accomplished that week. None of those moments had seemed enormous on their own. I'd always found a reason. Dad was busy, Mom was stressed. Ryan needed support. There was always an explanation. Looking at them all together was different. It wasn't one decision. It was a pattern stretching across years. A few comments made me uncomfortable. Some people criticized my parents harshly. Others insulted Ryan. I didn't like that. Whatever had happened between us, I didn't want strangers turning my family into entertainment. I closed the app for the rest of the afternoon. That night, Daniel found me sitting quietly on our porch. You disappeared. I needed some air. He sat beside me. You okay? I keep wondering why I never saw it. You probably did. I looked at him. You just kept finding reasons to forgive it. He wasn't accusing me. He was simply stating something I already knew. A few days later, another post caught everyone's attention. This one wasn't from someone I recognized immediately. The profile picture belonged to an older woman. Then I read her name, Mrs. Henderson, our old neighbor. She'd lived across the street until I was 12. Her post was simple. People are asking whether this kind of favoritism really happened. I can't speak for everything, but I remember one afternoon very clearly. She described watching my parents load Ryan's birthday presents into the car for a weekend celebration. She also remembered seeing me sitting alone on our front steps. According to her, she'd walked over with a cupcake because she'd learned from another neighbor that it was my birthday too. Emma thanked me and whispered that her birthday dinner had been moved because Ryan's tournament ran late. She smiled when she said it, but no child should have to smile through something like that. I stared at the screen. I hadn't thought about that cupcake in years. I remembered the pink frosting. I remembered thanking her. I remembered telling myself it wasn't a big deal. Reading her version of the story hurt more than remembering my own, because she had seen what I'd worked so hard to hide. If you've ever looked back on your childhood and realized certain things weren't as normal as you believed, I'd love to hear how that realization changed you. I still refuse to comment. I didn't defend anyone. I didn't confirm anything. I simply kept living my life while the conversation continued without me. Then, one afternoon at work, my phone started ringing. I glanced at the screen. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. Mom. It was the first time she'd called me in weeks. I let the phone ring 3 more times before answering. Hello? Mom didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the honeymoon. She went straight to the point. We need to meet. Her voice sounded tense. It's important. I looked through the office window for a moment. What about? This isn't a phone conversation? I almost said no. Instead, I replied, Daniel's coming with me. There was a short silence. Fine. We met 2 days later at a small restaurant halfway between our homes. Daniel sat beside me. My parents were already there. Ryan arrived a few minutes later, looking exhausted. Nobody hugged. Nobody congratulated us on the wedding. Mom folded her hands on the table. This whole situation has gotten out of control. I waited. That video is making people think terrible things about our family. I blinked, not because I was surprised anymore, because I realized where this conversation was going. Dad finally spoke. People online don't know the full story. What story do they not know? Mom leaned forward. We want you to make a public statement. I stared at her. A statement? Tell people the video was misunderstood. I almost laughed. What exactly am I supposed to say? That nobody abandoned you. I looked from her to Dad. Neither of them looked embarrassed. Only worried. Not about me. About their reputation. You want me to tell strangers they imagined the empty chairs? Mom sighed impatiently. Emma, this isn't helping anyone. It seems to be helping you. Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside Dad. Mom continued. Families make sacrifices. This wasn't a sacrifice. It was for your brother's future. My wedding was my future. The table fell silent. A waitress approached to refill our water glasses. Nobody spoke until she walked away. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me for weeks. Did everyone really choose not to come? Mom answered too quickly. Yes. Ryan looked down. Dad rubbed his forehead. I noticed the hesitation before anyone else spoke. So I asked again. Did they? This time, Ryan quietly said, Not exactly. Mom turned toward him. Ryan. No. He took a slow breath. They deserve to know. Mom's expression hardened. We already discussed this. Ryan ignored her. I found out after the championship. He looked at me instead. Aunt Lisa wanted to come. I frowned. What? So did Uncle Mark? He continued naming relatives. A couple of our cousins planned to split the weekend. They were going to attend your ceremony first. My heart sank. What happened? Ryan swallowed. Mom told them not to. The room became completely still. He looked ashamed. She kept saying the family needed to stay together. If people see empty seats at Ryan's game, he quoted quietly, it'll look like our family isn't united. I slowly turned toward Mom. You said that? She crossed her arms. I wanted our family to present a united front. You chose where that front would be. It was one weekend? It was my wedding. She shook her head. You've always been so understanding. I smiled. Not because anything was funny, because for the first time, those words had no power over me. I know. She looked confused. I've spent years understanding everyone else. I folded my hands on the table. I understand exactly what happened now. Ryan spoke again. I honestly didn't know she'd called everyone. I thought they made their own decision. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I'm sorry, Emma. I should have asked questions. I believed him. Not because it erased what happened, but because it sounded like the first honest thing anyone from my family had said since this started. Mom looked frustrated. So you're just going to let people think we're terrible parents? I answered calmly. I haven't told people what to think, but you could fix this. No. She stared at me. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not going to lie. Nobody raised their voice anymore. There wasn't any need. The loudest part of the conversation had already happened. Dad looked at me for a long moment. So what happens now? I looked at each of them, then at Daniel beside me. He didn't interrupt. He simply waited. I took one slow breath. I've already made my decision. No one at the table spoke. I didn't explain what that decision was. Not yet. I looked at my parents for another second. Then I stood up. I'm not making a public statement. Mom opened her mouth to argue again. I gently shook my head. I didn't post the video. I didn't ask anyone to criticize you. And I'm not going to lie just because people finally noticed something I've been trying not to notice for years. Dad looked tired, older than I remembered. Mom looked angry. Ryan looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Daniel stood beside me. He didn't speak for me. He simply reached for my hand. We walked out together. Nobody followed us. The video kept spreading for another couple of weeks. Eventually, the internet moved on, like it always does. A new story replaced the old one. The comments slowed down. The messages became less frequent. I never posted my side, not because I was afraid, because I didn't feel like I owed strangers an explanation. The video already showed everything that mattered. Not the empty chairs, the people who quietly stood up and filled them. That was the part I wanted to remember. Ryan called me a few times over the next month. The first couple of times, I let it go to voicemail. Eventually, I answered. I'm not calling to defend Mom, he said. I know. I've been thinking about a lot of things. So have I. There was a long pause. I can't change what happened. No. But I'd like to try being a better brother. I believed he meant it. That didn't erase 30 years. It didn't erase my wedding day. It didn't erase every birthday, every graduation, every moment I'd been asked to understand. But it was still something. I'd like that, I said. But it's going to take time? I know. And things aren't going back to the way they were. I understand. For the first time, it sounded like he actually did. My parents were different. Mom sent a few short texts over the following months, mostly holidays, occasionally a photo. None of them contained the apology I used to wait for. I stopped waiting. Dad reached out once to ask if we could have lunch. We did. It was awkward. He talked more than usual. I listened more than I spoke. When we left, he hugged me a little longer than he ever had before. It wasn't a magical moment. It didn't fix everything, but it was honest. And honestly, was enough for that day. Daniel's family never asked me to choose between them and my own. They just kept inviting us over. Sunday dinners, birthdays, barbecues, game nights where nobody cared who won. His mom still texted me recipes she thought I'd like. His dad still called me kiddo. His nieces still insisted I join every board game, even though they knew I'd probably lose. None of it felt performative. It was simply the way they loved people. One afternoon, months after the wedding, I found our framed wedding photo while cleaning. Not the perfectly posed portrait, the candid one. The moment Daniel's family had quietly crossed the aisle. You could see people smiling at one another. Someone was pulling out another chair. His grandmother was patting the seat beside her for one of my friends. Nobody was looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. I realized something I'd never noticed before. Those empty chairs had hurt more than I can explain. But they had also made something else visible. They showed me exactly who chose to be there when being there actually mattered. For years, I thought family meant earning your place, keeping the peace, being understanding, making yourself smaller so someone else could shine. Now it feels different. Family is the people who show up, the people who make room, the people who don't wait to be asked before they sit beside you. I still have my last name. I still have complicated feelings about the people I grew up with. Some relationships are slowly changing. Some are standing still. And some may never become what I once hoped they would be. I've made peace with not knowing exactly how all of that ends, because I stopped chasing something that was never mine to earn. If you've stayed with me through this story, I'd really like to hear what you think. Do you believe family is defined by blood, by the people who show up, or by something in between? I'd love to read your perspective. When I think back to my wedding now, I don't remember the empty side of the room first. I remember the people who quietly stood up, crossed the aisle, and filled those empty chairs. It turns out those empty seats didn't just show me who was missing. They made room for the people who had already chosen to love me.